Hey, Taylor Ray here with a quick editor's note up here at the top. We go into the story of Star Wars Battlefront II about the microtransactions and loot box controversy with a lot of public outcry. Just hours before it launches, literally minutes after we recorded this episode earlier, the news broke that EA and DICE have confirmed officially that they are temporarily turning off microtransactions, in-game purchases using real money until they adjust and balance that economy. So, breaking news tonight about that. More on our Twitter account. Remember to follow us at 1PVS2P. And thank you for listening to this episode 90. Hello, you're listening to the 1P versus 2P podcast. Plausibly live, talking about video game news, reviews, history, music, and culture. I am your host, Taylor Ray. With me, as always, is my co-host and brother, Ryan Ray.
Hey, Taylor, it's been a while.
It has, yeah. We're recording a lot less frequently nowadays, but we do a lot of work on our website and across our social media channels. And a quick update here at the top about that. We've changed our Twitter handle from at 1PVS2P _podcast. It's been that way for, 80, 90 episodes up to this point. We've now changed it to something much more simple to remember. It's at 1PVS2P. So very simple. We've sort of unified our brand across all our social media channels. We do so much more than just this show, just this podcast. We do video work. We share a lot of interesting articles from the gaming industry all over our social media channels on YouTube, Facebook, even SoundCloud. We curate a lot of game music through there as well. So just to recap, Twitter at 1PVS2P. Follow us on there. We're very, very active there. And thanks again for following. All right, let's get into video game news. Earlier this month, a lot of stuff has happened. A lot of buzz surrounding this given... Well, we're recording this on Thursday, November 16th, but you're going to hear this. This will be posted on Friday, November 17th, which is the release date for Star Wars Battlefront II. A lot of controversy swirling about this, reigniting a lot of talk about microtransactions and loot boxes. Ryan, recap the story for us.
Definitely. As you know, many of this fall's games, including Shadow of War, Destiny 2, Forza 7, you just mentioned Battlefront 2, all have loot boxes. If you're not familiar with that, these are basically systems in which you can spend real money to get randomized gear or loot in the form of these random treasure boxes. Gamers all over the place have been really upset by the inclusion of these microtransactions. Typically, you buy, the $60 game, and then all of a sudden you're getting an upsell on $3, $5, best value, however many loot boxes. And typically they have some kind of impact on your progression. Ideally not, but sometimes they're cosmetic loot boxes like in Overwatch, or sometimes, as has been more recently the case, they actually have more of a gameplay impact, more of an impact on your progression.
Right.
Like in Shadow of War, basically the real ending of that game is locked behind a grind, which you can do without paying any real money, but then it becomes a grind, and it's much easier to just pay $10 and get the best orcs, in that case, that come out of the loot boxes to kind of help speed that process along.
It seems artificially imposed in the effort to get as much money out from people who've already spent $60, maybe a little bit less on a AAA game, right?
Right. And there's been a lot of talk about whether or not this constitutes gambling, because the odds of you getting a legendary or the best loot possible in these boxes often is not posted because it's not required to legally. In China it is, and increasingly more countries are looking at some of the conversation around loot boxes and whether or not it's gambling, and considering taking some action. Belgium, for example, today, Belgium's Gaming Commission is currently taking a look at loot boxes in video games, particularly focusing on Star Wars Battlefront II and Overwatch. They've been saying that the practice of buying these add-on boxes may constitute gambling. The ESRB has also commented. The ESRB, of course, is the U.S. ratings board, and they have a quote that I'm going to read here from a Kotaku story last month. They said, Quote, ESRB does not consider loot boxes to be gambling. While there is an element of chance in these mechanics, the player is always guaranteed to receive in-game content, even if the player unfortunately receives something they don't want. We think of it as a similar principle to collectible card games. Sometimes you'll open a pack and get a brand new holographic card you've had your eye on for a while, but other times you'll end up with a pack of cards you'll already have. Now, I just want to note here that the ESRB is also an industry board. It's set up by the big video game publishers, EA, Activision. So it has kind of a dual role. It's a semi-governmental body. So of course the ESRB is going to have the video game big companies and publishers' interests at stake when they say stuff like this.
That's true.
So what do you think about all of the loot boxes that are happening right now in gaming? That seems to be the big hot topic.
This has been a trend going on for the past 10 years, going back to the previous generation. And unfortunately, it's only gotten worse over time. I think right now we're at this sort of tipping point. Let's call it that, watershed moment. I think people ultimately are very, very fed up. And I think also in this industry, it rapidly, dramatically, companies started implementing this stuff much more heavily with the advent of mobile's popularity, right? Nearly every game that you see hitting the top of the charts, being most downloaded on both Android and iOS platforms, the majority of them are free-to-play games riddled with microtransactions. And the goal of a lot of these developers and publishers is to try to squeeze as much extra money after playing these games without ever having to pay that initial purchase price, right? So it's an interesting concept, and I get why it will never go away. Now, to the extent at which it's exploiting consumers who've already paid full price for a lot of these console games, especially given Star Wars Battlefront II, which retails at $60. I mean, you're going to find a bunch of sales on it very, very quickly, I imagine, right now, given this whole controversy. But I will say that EA has responded several times over just this past week, their launch window. And, they're hearing the fan feedback. They did an AMA on Reddit. That didn't go very well. I think they just broke the record for one of the most downvoted comments in Reddit history, explaining their position on including microtransactions and the time it takes to grind out some of people's favorite Star Wars heroes and characters like Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. There have been player estimates out there saying currently pre-launch that it takes about 40 hours for you to grind to earn in-game currency to unlock one hero. Now, as we're recording this, there will likely be changes across the board. EA can change the monetary values at any time. And I know, Ryan, you found some late-breaking changes that people are noticing on Twitter, even the day before this game is released.
Right. Jason Schreier has been saying on Twitter that rumors are swirling that EA is about to pull an Xbox One, which is a reference to when Microsoft first announced the Xbox One. They kind of reversed. Originally, the Xbox One was going to be more of a media platform. And then within almost a month of the console's launch, they've reversed course and tried to change their policy.
On the always online feature, right?
Correct. And he's hearing that potentially EA might be pulling their microtransactions from Battlefront 2. And in fact, Jeff Gersman of Giant Bomb tweeted out a picture that says, it would appear that the ability to purchase crystals, which I guess is the in-game currency for Star Wars Battlefront 2, with real money has been removed, and he showed a screenshot from his game. This controversy is going to continue. I think one of the reasons why it's happening, the sales data bears this out. Loot boxes are actually very, very popular. People are buying them in lots. So publishers and developers are incentivized to include them. And increasingly, the $60 that you pay to buy a game isn't covering the costs of development, marketing. Games have gotten more expensive to make, and the price of the games...
Right. These budgets are astronomical.
Right. And the price of games hasn't gone up in, basically since you and I were kids. And they have to make up the money somewhere. And so they've added, before it was horse armor, then with mobile games, right? Farmville had, you could pay money to have more energy, to do more things, to buy more stamina, to do all this. This kind of stuff has plagued video games for a long time. Even arcade machines back in the day were designed to eat up more of your quarters, kill you quicker so that you would feed more quarters into the machine. And this is just the natural progression of that. Loot boxes, kind of playing more into the seedier gambling side of things. Where I have a problem with it, not only where it hampers progression in a game, but it also may be preying on people who may have gambling tendencies or, may be falling into the traps of addiction. They keep buying these loot boxes. I mean, we haven't heard any horror stories of people mortgaging their homes to buy, loot boxes in Overwatch, but
I hope we never do.
But with, so many more loot boxes happening in more games, you could see a scenario where that could really happen and be an actual real problem. This is already hurting people quite a bit. And, where does it end?
Well, I'm not morally objected to loot boxes in general and microtransactions. I get it. I get the reason and the business cases behind them. I think now this tipping point revolves around the fact that Star Wars Battlefront II, these microtransactions give you gameplay advantages in the sense that you are getting cards, things that unlock upgrades for your weapons, other new weapons and gadgets to be used in games, new heroes that other people don't have access to. And for someone who doesn't pay into the microtransactions in the game, they have to spend hours and hours and hours grinding it out to earn that same content. So it really gives sort of an unfair gameplay advantage. And that's something I even noticed when I tried the beta. I did play the beta on PC, and I immediately noticed that. I thought that was a bit strange that I was getting stat upgrades for certain weapons through loot boxes. And I thought, wow, this is going to be scary. Versus something like Overwatch. Overwatch, I think, does a little bit better of a job because all of those things that you're unlocking, although they're all randomized, you never know what you're going to get. They're all blind boxes. They're all cosmetic related.
I would feel a little bit better about loot boxes if the process was a little bit more transparent, if we did see the odds. Dota 2 a while ago had this issue where people were not knowing what is in the loot boxes. And then Valve decided, okay, we'll tell you what your odds are of getting these items and what items potentially you could get with these specific loot boxes, because in that game, there were even different flavors of loot boxes, right? Seasons, one's tied to the international. But if we're going to start to see loot boxes in single player story games, let us know what is in the box if you're going to continue to let loot boxes be a thing. Why make this like black box where you don't know what you're buying when, what the progression is, all that stuff. It needs to be more transparent. And the more you try to obfuscate it, the more people are going to be angry and frankly, probably not going to be wanting to buy your game.
Right.
So, speaking of EA and, some interesting news, let's say. I don't know how to feel about this, but maybe our conversation will shake it out. EA is buying Titanfall developer Respawn for over $400 million. This is a story that kind of came out at the end of last week. Taylor, why don't you recap it for us?
Well, the reason why this is specifically interesting is because EA, by the way, as a publisher, historically is known for acquiring. It's a giant publisher, right? They're known for acquiring smaller studios, buying out competition, poaching top talent, and then shutting down these same studios. They've had a long history of that. We don't need to recap that stuff. But the most recent example was EA shuttering Visceral Games. Visceral, known mostly for the Dead Space franchise. So a lot of people were sort of forlorn about that because they know that EA may not use that license going forward, EA having published those games before. So it's likely the end of Dead Space as we know it, just those 3 games, and that's about it. And what makes this a little bit juicy in the industry here is that EA did the same thing with Respawn, in the sense that Titanfall 1 and Titanfall 2 were initially developed by Respawn and published, by EA. So if history tells us anything, they are likely to shutter it down in the future. Now, that's a huge amount of money that they're spending to acquire these studios. But again, in the long run, it probably pays dividends for these studios. There are financial incentives, business reasons why they go through these smaller studio acquisitions.
Right. The EA acquisition is basically a kiss of death, or it has been. EA hasn't had the best track record.
Yeah, I'm trying to rack my brain about more recent examples over the past couple of years.
I mean, famously Maxis, right, the developers of SimCity, was probably the last big profile one. But I mean, their their record on this is just a graveyard of smaller studios. It's really sad.
And the use of licenses, right? They just let licenses die out, very popular ones.
Right, and specifically Titanfall 2, so EA was the publisher. Titanfall 2 was released between EA's big shooter game, Battlefield 1, and Call of Duty, rival Activision's, the other big shooter that year. Of the three, I would say probably Titanfall 2 was the best gameplay wise, but
critically acclaimed, yeah.
But sales wise, it was the weakest of the three. Battlefield 1 performed the best sales wise, and EA probably had something a little bit to do with the timing window. So they went ahead and bought the studio, and buying Respawn in particular is pretty interesting because that developer is headed by former Call of Duty designers Jason West and Vince Zampella, who the reason that they formed Respawn in the first place was to get away from Activision.
Right, yeah.
So now they got out from Activision, and now they're under another publisher, another big publisher, and now it has everybody wondering if by the way, when this announcement was made, they kind of backdoored a Titanfall 3 announcement. So Titanfall 3 is coming. Now we're all wondering if Titanfall 3, what that game is going to shape up to look like now that it's under EA's umbrella, and if it's going to have the standard EA shooter thing now with loot boxes, and it's going to affect the multiplayer progression, and if the business of EA is going to hamper the actual game of Titanfall 3.
The other ramification of this is that there was another Star Wars game that was being being developed by Respawn that has since been canceled. And that was a huge bummer to a lot of people because that was something that had been in development for a long time. It was an action-adventure Star Wars game that not many details had been released about it, but EA, with this acquisition, announced, hey, we're shutting this down. Maybe the project isn't going so well. So that angered a lot of people on top of that. And I think that was headlined by, is it Amy Hennig, who's pretty well known in the industry, a head writer?
She was at Visceral.
She was at Visceral, right, when they shut her down.
Correct.
Visceral. Sorry, my mistake. Yes, that's right.
And when I think about why that happened, that was basically, the rumors were that game was basically going to be Star Wars but Uncharted. And when I think about the good Star Wars games, I'm talking about like Knights of the Old Republic,
yep,
or even Dark Forces, or Shadows of the Empire, or
the X-Wing games versus TIE Fighter.
X-Wing, TIE Fighter. They're games that are in the Star Wars universe but tell their own stories.
Right.
And
they're sort of tangential to the mainline core movies.
Right. And when we talk about the Star Wars games that are coming out nowadays, it's more referencing, it's playing on your nostalgia, right?
Yeah.
Like Star Wars Battlefront 2 has heroes like Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, Darth Maul.
Han Solo, yeah.
Han Solo, the more recent Force Awakens characters. And, say what you will about the quality of those games, but by referencing more of the movie Star Wars things, you could say that they're not as original. So
right, yeah, there it is.
Right. So it leaves, Star Wars aside, it leaves an open question about, whether EA can really take Respawn's game development efforts and do something really awesome with Titanfall, or just continue to poach their talent and leave another studio in the dust.
Yeah. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but again, as history tells us, that is more likely than not the case. So we'll revisit that when we hear about Respawn's shuttering after Titanfall 3. Anyway, the Xbox One X, that is now out. A lot of reactions about this new hardware from Microsoft. What are the reactions so far about it, Ryan? I did not upgrade it. I still have my Xbox One, the original launch one. I don't see a need to upgrade yet.
Well, so basically the consensus seems to be that the Xbox One X is a good piece of gaming hardware for $500. It runs games at 4K resolution. It runs them smoothly and quietly, but it's also an Xbox One, a console that has frankly been struggling to keep up with the PS4 since the two launched within a week of each other back in 2013. The Xbox One, I'll just say it. This is objective fact. I'm not trying to delineate anything here, but it doesn't have as many games. It certainly doesn't have as many big exclusives.
Right.
There is a list of games that are Xbox One X enhanced, and it's very long, which I think is a very good thing. However, there are only 3 recent titles on that list. Assassin's Creed Origins, which came out not too long ago, Forza 7, again this year, and Shadow of War. the flagship title that is missing that should have been there when this was originally announced as Project Scorpio, Crackdown, has been delayed into next year. So they don't have a tentpole release to come along outside with their like big new, more powerful box.
Well, to be fair, to contrast with the PS4 though, with the PS4 Pro, there aren't that many supported games that run in enhanced pro mode.
Right.
So just to be fair, I don't think either are really great value propositions.
Right. We said when these iterative consoles first came out, we knew this was going to happen when people were buying phones on a yearly basis, like, and the phones were getting incrementally better, that like, okay, well, we're going to just like time our watches to see when this happens to consoles. And here it is. And the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X are coming out, and sure, they're more powerful machines, but to do what exactly, right? Like when Prey came out earlier this year, that said that from launch it had PS4 Pro support, and then it totally wasn't there at all. Right?
They later patched it in, yes.
I think the hard part that Microsoft and Sony are finding out is that you can talk all you want about the graphics upgrades and frame rates being a lot better,
and resolution's
but it's so
higher,
hard
yeah.
It's so hard to sell this when not all the games that are coming out from that point forward don't have these enhancements attached to it.
Exactly.
And not right. Like if it was a point where it's like, okay, new console is coming out, all games from this point forward will have all these enhancements, smooth frame rates, beautiful graphics, no problems at all. That would be one thing, but that has not been how the story has played out. And it continues to be an issue, right? Now the Xbox One X comes out, $500 like for an incremental upgrade for a console that it seems that sales-wise, it seems to be doing well. According to NPD, 800,000 units of the Xbox One X sold in the UK, which is, relatively equivalent.
Those are pretty strong numbers, yeah.
Yeah, that's relatively equivalent to like Switch launch sales the first week,
right?
Which is very good for Microsoft. But on the other hand, like, to what effect?
I think it's because these are people who didn't already originally own the Xbox One or Xbox One S, the smaller version, and to me, that makes sense. If you're getting into one of these consoles, your best bet to future-proof yourself is to buy either the PS4 Pro or the Xbox One X. Now, granted, how do you take advantage of the better power, the better GPU, right? These more powerful boxes, is that you have to have 4K ready TVs. And a lot of people still don't have that. I think 4K displays are still cost prohibitive right now.
Right.
May change starting with this Black Friday, but I don't know.
Right. We're getting to the point where 4K seems to be like where HD was maybe a generation ago, where like they're starting to become more commonplace. And when people are on their TV upgrades, you're likely to buy a TV that has 4K capability.
Of course. Why wouldn't you?
But did you see the story? I think it was this week from Bloomberg, Phil Spencer, who's head of Xbox, saying that it seems like the direction for Microsoft moving forward is he didn't basically come out and say this is the last Xbox, but he did say that Microsoft's direction moving forward is that they're probably going to do more software sales. They're going to target a like more streaming service for their gaming. As opposed to making more hardware, which if you look at where Microsoft is at with their like Office or Windows, they're trying to give it more like subscription based, you less buy their products and their hardware. I mean, they're selling the Surface and whatnot, but like they discontinued the Zune a while ago. They're not making the Microsoft phone,
right?
Like
the Windows Phone.
It's
yeah,
harder,
yeah.
Right? It's harder and harder to find Microsoft hardware, but on the software side, like, with the Xbox Play Anywhere, like I can buy most of Microsoft's first party lineup on the PC,
right?
Without any extra baggage from the Xbox One. So we may get to a point where the Windows Store turns into the Xbox Store. I mean, we're already there, right?
Yes, like, that's the point.
I don't have to buy an Xbox One to play Forza or Gears of War 4. Basically, all of Microsoft's first party lineup.
Right, because there was that decision made a while back. They've announced this, I think, in a past E3 where they announced that on the development side, this Universal Windows Platform, UWP, when you're developing a game for Xbox One, you're also developing it for Windows 10. You're optimizing it for Windows 10. So if you have some halfway decent PC to run it on, people are, spending their money and getting it in both places, but you can totally see where this is going, right? That more and more people are owning gaming ready PCs and are playing these games more on Windows 10 because the Xbox One it hasn't had as strong sales as the PS4 has, let's say, in this generation. Now, that is to say that there are still a lot of people out there that still prefer consoles. They don't want to deal with the hassle of building their own machine, having to troubleshoot hardware-related issues, having to deal with compatibility problems. A lot of PC ports are still pretty poor because a lot of companies outsource that to third parties, and they don't do a great job with QA. So I get the need still for these powerful consoles that live under your TV, that are reliable and consistent. But it's just not for someone like you and me that go in and buy consoles closer to their launch windows initially. Until Microsoft can acquire more exclusives, put out many more worthwhile games, I think they're still going to struggle behind over the next couple of years behind Sony and Nintendo.
I will say that the one thing, good piece of this that I do think I hope happens is that with the Xbox One, Microsoft has been way better about Xbox 360 and original Xbox backwards compatibility.
Oh, yes.
And I would hope that, well, with Phil Spencer there saying that he wants to see more game streaming capabilities, a lot like PlayStation Now, I think is what he's referring to. I would like to see, original Xbox games and Xbox 360 and hopefully eventually Xbox One games come to the PC via backwards compatibility. Like, it would be cool to see, I don't know, what would be like an Xbox, like, Blink's the Time Cat, even though I don't like Blinks.
How about Ninja Gaiden? Let's go with that.
Sure.
Crimson Skies. Those are both two games that are already there, yeah.
Right, Fusion Frenzy, right? It would be cool to see those games come to the PC finally, yeah, through backwards compatibility. There would have to be some emulation stuff that happens, but it seems like Microsoft is getting there.
Right. All right, moving on to our last major news story. Nintendo shut down their very popular Miiverse social networking service that was introduced with the Nintendo Wii U. It launched in late 2012. Basically, with the Wii U and the 3DS, with the stylus, you can draw pictures, you can type in hints for games. There was a lot of neat, clever integrations with games like Super Mario Maker, what else? Splatoon, and you saw a lot of people sharing their photos through those communities within the Wii U and 3DS infrastructures, and then also sharing them on social media. Now it's officially shut down 5 years later. A lot of fond memories, people sharing their highlights, a lot of streams on people playing with the Miiverse in its final hours. And sort of as a very fond farewell, Nintendo also shared this giant portrait collage of user drawings, thanking and people missing the Miiverse. Even Shigeru Miyamoto drew some thank you, goodbye pictures as well. So sort of a fond farewell to the Miiverse. Any lasting memories, Ryan?
I thought its integration was really cool. It's certainly one of the most odd gaming social network experiments that Nintendo has been a part of. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Nintendo is at its best when it's weird Nintendo. And that Nintendo of all companies would do something like this for kids and police it and make it honestly an integral part of some of these games. Super Mario Maker would not have been the same game without the Miiverse. There was literally a Miiverse stage in the latest Super Smash Brothers.
Yes.
It was cool. It was weird. I hope Nintendo takes their lessons that they learned from the Miiverse and does it better in maybe on the Switch or any future endeavors that they do. Goodbye, Miiverse. We salute you.
And there was nothing quite like it. There wasn't any of this heavy integration, and I think the reason why Nintendo has ended it is because it probably required a lot of time and money to moderate it to make it ultimately kid-friendly. And now you see with the Nintendo Switch, you have native integration with posts to Facebook and Twitter, and that has been very, very, very popular. People sharing screenshots, sharing video replays, and that's been awesome. And I think that ultimately is the direction they want to move forward in and sort of abandon the 3DS and the Wii U hardware with the Miiverse. It probably wasn't worth it to them in the long run.
Right, but they never would have gotten there without the Miiverse, right? So
of course, yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about what we've been playing. Enough with the news. Taylor, what have you been playing?
What are you buying?
Well, I think we've been playing, as we came up with this list, we've been playing literally the exact same games over the past month. So starting off, let's talk about Super Mario Odyssey, because that game is huge. A lot of very positive reactions, critically acclaimed. Add me to the list. I think this is one of my top 5 Mario games of all time, period. I mean, it might be even in my top 3. I really love this game. This game is just a giant nostalgia trip. It's constantly rewarding. There are moons, which are the equivalent to Super Mario 64 stars. They're just constantly moons that you're acquiring. You're constantly being, I like to call them endorphin shots. It just feels good to constantly find these secrets and Easter eggs in Super Mario Odyssey. I think it's so clever and witty and fun and whimsical. It's all of these things, and it's really something else. It's really great. It's an essential title for the Nintendo Switch so far. If you don't own this game, if you don't own the Nintendo Switch yet, this should be your first purchase.
Right, along with Breath of the Wild. Let's not discount that.
True.
But Mario, I've been waiting a good long time for a good Mario game. You could argue, we can have the debate about Mario games on Wii U. I think Mario Galaxy and Mario Galaxy 2 were probably the two last 3D Mario platforming games on Nintendo's major consoles that I would consider in the, like, we can have, again, arguments all day about what the mainline Mario canon is.
Yeah, I think I know what you're alluding to. You're referring to that Jeremy Parrish ranking that was on Polygon that was circulating around about ranking the core Mario games. Man, that was...
Yeah,
Some opinions are more wrong than others. Come on now.
I don't want to go there. I see where he's coming from, but anyway.
Well, can we just say at least what he ranked number one was New Super Mario Brothers U, and that was just a travesty of the history of Mario games. Wouldn't you agree? Come on now.
Well, I don't think it's a travesty. I mean, you're allowed to have your opinion, but I would certainly agree. Bring this back to Mario Odyssey. I would certainly agree that Mario Odyssey is one of the top Mario games that has ever been released. It's certainly been a while since we've seen a game of this scale. It's a delight to play, from start to finish. It has some really surprising, it turns some of the Mario conventions on their head. The whole capturing enemies to, use their abilities to solve puzzles to get more moons. And, there's a specific part at the end that I think we'll say for Game of the Year, I think is a very, a neat tie-in to, what Mario games have really been all about this whole time. And it's a delight. And they give you an incentive after you see credits in that game to continue to collect more moons. There are 999 moons in this game. You will complete the main campaign probably around the time you collect 150 to 200 moons. I think I finished around like 170. Right now I'm at probably like 340 moons.
Yeah, I finished with about 200 collected, and I'm nearing 300 right now.
But it's just a fun to move around as Mario in that game. It's fun to jump. There are some kingdoms that are worse than others. I think some of my favorites have been like Seaside. There's a kingdom at the end.
I loved Bowser's Castle. I love Bowser's Castle.
Bowser's Castle is also super cool. There's a kingdom in the end that I don't want to spoil. That's a really neat throwback.
Don't mention it now. That's a huge spoiler.
But it's what a delight.
Yeah.
I can't speak to the 2-player mode. I think like Mario Galaxy, it's probably not all that great. But again, we have a whole new generation of Nintendo fans growing up, and it's good that they're finally getting a real taste of what Mario games can be. And I'm so glad that it turns out to be Mario Odyssey. And that song, the theme song.
Yeah.
Jump Up Superstar.
You're referring to the New Donk City area, which is like a New York City equivalent, and there's humans there. Like, humans appearing next to Mario is very strange. It's so fun, and it's just a wonderful moment midway through that game. This big song and dance number. I'm sure if you've paid attention to Nintendo's promotions recently, E3, you've heard the song, things like that. So it's great, and the costumes are also fantastic. You're constantly unlocking new stuff through normal coins that you collect, or in world specific coins to each kingdom. They're purple coins, and the costumes are just cleverly designed. There's some really great stuff in there. Some really, really, really funny references in there that I'm not going to spoil if you haven't played it yet. We're going to revisit this during our Game of the Year deliberations coming in December.
That would be my final thought. This is definitely a contender for the conversation.
Yes.
What a triumph. Let's talk about Pyre, which you and I have. I've completed. You're playing it right now.
Yes.
What do you think of Pyre so far?
Okay, so for people who aren't aware of what Pyre is best described as NBA Jam mixed with Oregon Trail. I know that sounds like a weird elevator pitch, but somehow it works. Okay. These are the developers behind Bastion and Transistor, Supergiant Games. they're very well known for their art style and voice work. They've made some very popular games in the past couple of years, and with Pyre, I think they've done an excellent job with their world building and style. My only complaint about this game is that there's a little bit too much story and exposition between these matches. So the way Pyre works is you're like this traveling band of outcasts, misfits, banished to this sort of hellscape area. Let's call it that, right? And in order to sort of redeem yourself, you need to perform these, what they call rites. Like they're sort of like rites of atonement. You are just competing. It's like a basketball style like game. Basketball mixed with soccer.
It's like 3-on-3 matches where there's a ball in the center, and the two teams are competing for who can put the ball in the hoop, either by dunking the hoop, this theoretical
dunking the hoop.
Or,
what?
Yeah, sorry.
You put the ball in the hoop. That's how this game works. But what makes this game really interesting and unique is that you can only move one character at a time, and you can also attack enemy players and sort of banish them temporarily, so that 3-on-3 all of a sudden turns into advantages where it's like 3-on-2 or 3-on-1 or sometimes 3 versus 0. And you're also vulnerable to the same things. The enemy AI can attack you. And eventually, as you score as many points, you either win or lose the right. These games, these rights you can lose them, and the game will advance, the story will advance with auto checkpoints. So it affects the story with branching paths in a way that I wasn't really expecting. But the time spent between these matches, these rights, I just think the game kind of lags a little bit. So I'm a little disappointed by that. I'm about 3.5 hours in, and I've only played about 5 rights. I'm constantly having to scroll through text. I don't know. I'm not really getting too involved with the character building. I don't know. I think, Ryan, you're probably more of a fan of that kind of stuff, but I wish there were more rights built into the game.
I agree with you that there is probably a little bit too much lore in this game, but I think the narrative is there to get you attached to the characters, and I think you're still early on to the point where you haven't really formed those bonds with the characters in your troop of misfits. You can kind of, if you win so at the end of like a season of rights, you play one final World Cup or NBA Finals or whatever, insert sports analogy here, match to determine who gets to come up from this hellscape into the real world. You choose a player from the best player on your team, and you get to decide basically who gets to leave hell forever. And it's kind of an interesting concept. It's like, what if LeBron had his best season ever, and at the end of the season he just quit, right?
I think that's called retirement in real life.
Right, but this is basically the essential question Pyre asks you. Do you send up LeBron, or do you send up LeBron's sidekick, or depending on your relationships with these characters, do you want to send up your best player or the one that you have played with the longest, only to leave players you haven't been, or characters you haven't been using as much, to continue to go through the rights and the cycle all over again.
Yeah, and the impact there is that there are RPG elements built into this.
Correct.
You gain experience, you have equipment, you have abilities, there are skill trees, different characters have different stats and advantages and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I will just say, I think this game deserves to be in the conversation for one of the most gorgeous looking games this year.
I agree.
The handcrafted art style is just, I think, between Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre, I think Supergiant has finally nailed their aesthetic with Pyre. It's a very strong, the art really plays into the game's themes, the music as well.
A lot of great watercolor.
Yeah, very well done. All right, speaking of a game with great art, let's talk about Cuphead.
Oh, man, Cuphead. Wow. I mean, just a lot of Game of the Year preview we're doing in this episode. Cuphead is incredible. One of my favorite games this year. This is a game, if you haven't seen this yet, I don't know, you must be living under a rock, but Cuphead, the art style is like these 1920s, 1930s old-time Disney cartoons. Think along those lines. And essentially, it's like a Gunstar Heroes or a Contra game where it's a run-and-gun 2D action platformer. And I've heard people describe it as a boss rush, but there are also sort of mini platforming levels in between bosses. And it's brutally difficult. It took me only about 10.5 hours to beat. I think, Ryan, you spent a little bit less time on it, but
Yeah, about 6 hours. But
6
that's
hours?
Because I'm,
what?
yeah, that's because I'm pretty good.
Oh my god. Okay.
But at any skill level, I think Cuphead is a lot of fun.
Yes.
There are different abilities that you can buy, different loadouts that you can, equip Cuphead or his brother Mugman, that you can play this game in co-op.
Yeah.
Which I actually do think the game scales a little bit, but having 2 players on the screen makes the action very, very chaotic.
Yes.
It's hard to keep track of your character.
There are a lot of bullet hell style moments in this game. It's not a shmup. It's not a shoot 'em up where it's vertical scrolling. You're in a static window, but bosses are constantly changing forms, and you're constantly dodging enemy projectiles. There's a lot of stuff going on screen, but it's so amazing to look at, even if you're not actively holding the controller.
And I would say that the game does encourage you as you play to get better and progressively better and better and better as you go through the bosses. The bosses do get progressively harder, but the bosses are also based on predictable patterns. Like, good video game bosses, there are patterns that and tells that while there can be slightly random, they also are like it's built into the art so that when one character is wagging their finger, a certain kind of attack is going to come out. So you can kind of follow the patterns and say, okay, well maybe I can jump to this different pattern or this platform and avoid that attack, or try up the spread weapon instead of the homing weapon, or the charge shot as opposed to the standard shot, and really experiment with what kind of gameplay style will best help you overcome the boss. It's really well done. I think the music in that game is fantastic.
Yes, a lot of jazz elements in there. Yeah,
it's one of these games that has a very strong, again, just like Pyre, very strong thematic presence in its art and its gameplay. Really, really well done from a studio that nobody's ever heard of before. This is their first game, Studio MDHR. A really good first attempt. I can't see how Cuphead can't be in the conversation for Game of the Year. It's really something else.
Yeah, available right now on Xbox One and Windows 10, of course on Steam, GOG, those kind of places. So yeah, highly recommend this game. It is fantastic.
Yeah, and let's quickly talk about, this has been a while since we recorded an episode. Let's talk briefly about our time in Destiny 2's raid. Taylor, you finally went to the raid with me for the first time.
I did.
I'm a veteran of Destiny 1's raids. What did you think of the raid?
The raid's called Leviathan, and we spent hours on that thing. I think I wasted an entire Saturday running through the raid the first time, trying to learn the mechanics of each encounter, and then the final ultimate boss of the raid. Having to coordinate with, what was it, a total of, was it 6 people in our party?
Mm-hmm.
Having to voice chat and coordinate with strangers. You and I were in the party, but the rest were people we just met online. That was intense and frustrating at times, but ultimately rewarding in the end. I'm really glad I did it. And if you're the kind of person who enjoys the MMO grind, if you enjoy Destiny a lot, there are incentives for you to go back and complete the raid to earn even better exclusive loot that you can't normally earn otherwise. It is so challenging, though, managing a party of 6 that are all, they are difficult challenges built into these. Unfortunately, we ran into a couple of bugs, and that just wastes, sometimes 30 minutes, an hour of your time, and there's nothing you can do about it, and you just have to restart it and just power through it. And that's frustrating. You also have to keep a few, let's call them power bars next to you so that, you get few breaks in between gameplay during the raid. It's just like any other raid in video games, right? There's a huge time commitment there. So I'll leave it at that. I would definitely try a new raid in Destiny 2, but right now we're in this mode of endgame Destiny 2 where we're at the level cap. We keep doing the nightfalls. We keep getting better gear. And then there's not much else to do, right? Don't you feel the same way?
Right, you've reached the top of the mountain. There's nothing left for you until the DLC. When the DLC hits, actually, there was news today that the first piece of DLC will have an additional raid. So that's good for all these people who are enjoying Destiny 2, that there will be more content for them to, grit their teeth through. But I think the one comment I would say about this raid is probably the best of the Destiny raids that has ever been produced. But it's still, having said that, still way too long and still way too buggy. I think if the raids were more 2 to 3 hours as opposed to minimum 6 to 8, or in our case, the first time you go through it when you're trying to explain all the mechanics and you're figuring out the puzzles with a group of 6 people, that can take a full day. And that's a big ask for a player base that can be very casual. The hardcore players are going to do that, no problem. But we have a friend who we regularly play Destiny 2 with, and he's not interested in doing it at the rate at all, because asking a person to commit 6 hours to beat a video game level is just to sit down and do and bang your head against the wall to do one thing,
and having to learn the mechanics that are complicated,
right? To do that over and over and over again, I don't think most people are up for that. So if they would shorten the length of them, maybe make the challenges, gear it more towards the 2 to 3 hour mark, I think more people would be interested in doing this content. But again, it's the same thing that we said in the Destiny 1 raids. They're the best levels in Destiny. It's unlike anything you've ever experienced in video games.
Yes.
But the time ask is just way too great.
Agreed on that front. Any last thoughts on anything we talked about on our show?
No, I'm just say this will probably be one of the final episodes that we do before we record Game of the Year. I'm very excited. This has been a very great year in video games.
Oh yeah.
Despite all the controversies, despite all that stuff, this has probably been the best video game year since 2007. What is it about the years that end in 7?
Yeah,
it's
97.
It's
another good year.
It's I'm really excited to have these Game of the Year discussions this year.
Same here. Yeah. So just previewing our Game of the Year coverage, we will probably split that up between 3 to 4 episodes like we've done in the past 2 years. Ongoing coverage of that will begin sometime in December. So you can listen to these episodes over the holiday breaks, hopefully. We'll also be posting our Editor's Choice picks and other special awards and overall Game of the Year awards on our website. That's 1pvs2p.com. We'll also be sharing these announcements if you follow us on Twitter at 1pvs2p. Also on our Facebook page, facebook.com/1pvs2p. All right, let's wrap this thing up. If you liked today's episode, please subscribe to our show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. We would greatly, greatly appreciate the reviews. They're a huge, huge help.
You can also listen to us basically wherever fine podcasts are sold, YouTube, Google Play Music, TuneIn, or our website, which is 1pvs2p.com, or search for us using your favorite podcast app.
As always, we want to thank Phonetic Hero for the use of his songs for our show, Coffee Stomp and Super Manly Brothers X. Both songs are part of the compilation project Chiptunes Equals Win. I'm Taylor Ray. That's my brother and co-host Ryan Ray, editors at 1pvs2p.com. Thank you for listening.
Dunking the hoop, this theoretical hoop,